Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the library. This is the end of a 3-day weekend for us. I can't believe how quickly time is going by since I started streaming. I think there may be a problem with reality. It's going by very, very fast. The last two streams have been Dune Let's Play, I guess they're called, the type of stream. I played Dune Awakening, and they were like, it's hard to put that game down. Yeah, for time leaks. Yes, it's like a Doctor Who thing. I have no idea. I'm not well versed in Doctor Who stuff, but it sounds like a Doctor Who thing. It could be a Star Trek thing. I remember whenever those episodes came up in the various Star Trek episodes, but that we watched when I was a younger boy, especially, and of course all through life, like that series and that franchise, I guess, really has just gone on forever, which is great. My father absolutely hated time shenanigans. He always he did not want to keep track of what happened when. No, he just give me the story, give me the phasers, give me the torpedoes, give me the space trekking, and yeah, we're having a good time. As soon as it's like, oh well, no, wait, that happened only because something else happened, but then they went back and made that not happen, so that's why this is not happening. He absolutely deplored having to follow the quote unquote logic. It was always these days it's if you've talked to anyone with any kind of degree in physics, or I guess even not even degree, but anyone who deals with time travel and stories that mess up the timeline, you have to start talking about, okay, well, what type of time travel are we talking about now? It's like there's a whole there's a multiverse version where you don't really go back in time, you go to an alternate universe at some point in the timeline there that looks like it's your history, because that universe is otherwise very similar to yours, but in that universe you show up from a different universe, and that's the major difference, and then you change that universe. And I think what did Spider-Man? I think Spider-Man did that, right? That was kind of his gimmick. ReZero has hinted, so the anime ReZero is an isekai, but they hint at the idea. It's not a spoiler, right? This is it's been out long enough, hasn't it? They hint at the idea that every time he dies and he gets revived, that he isn't going actually just back in linear time, but that he is perhaps, I guess they didn't really know. They were some people were suggesting this might be possible. They were suggesting that he effectively abandons his friends and loved ones from the current timeline he is in when he fails, and he is going to another one to try again, and that those folk are left behind to deal with the consequences of his failure. So there was a certain time in the series when he was using death as a cheat code, right? I didn't work, whatever, I'll kill myself and go back, it'll be fine. And then he sort of gets presented with this possibility. It's like, are you sure there are actually no consequences for that action? Because there might be. You don't know. So that's one form of time travel. The other one is literally linear time travel. You literally go back and effectively erase everything that happened from your present to the point that you go back to and start rewriting it. And I think that's where I think it got complicated in the logic, because well, what happens if there are multiple time travelers, right? If you go backwards in time and do something, but then someone further in the future travels back in time and lands between those 2 points, erases you going back in time, but you're still back in time before they came back to their previous, like, it gets messy, right? You kind of don't want to do that form of time travel if you're going to write sort of a more complex time travel shenanigans. There are other forms too, I think, but we'll move on from that. Yeah, it's brain herdy, right? It's brain herdy, and I think that's why it fascinates some people and really pisses other people off. Like, no. We and like I guess it really. I'm not a big fan of time travel. I don't like the idea that the consequences of my actions can be undone. And I can get away scot-free with a lesson learned and a better motive next time. And I find most stories that incorporate that kind of idea, the reality is the lesson was there and easy to learn in the first place. There could have been no consequences in the first place, right? Like, how many characters are overtly excessively vain or prideful to the point of, like, you're kind of overdoing it. You're emphasizing it so much. It's like you're admitting that you're too much, and everyone doesn't believe it. I cannot think of an example. I may have made up a monster to be angry at, but I feel like this is a thing that occasionally happens. I'm not going to make accusations, but this is kind of like one of those things. I much prefer a story that sticks to its consequence. There are a lot of really rich tragedies, right? Really, really good stories. You are bound to a character. You follow them through a story. Perhaps they're a side character most of the time. This is what really happens to. And, perhaps the hero does make a mistake or is duped, right? And someone pays the ultimate price, and they are removed from the story as a consequence. That should stay. That is a powerful moment of growth for the hero or the protagonist. And to take that away is to cheapen life. And I hate when they do that. I find it really hard to, like, express strong emotion a lot of times. And these last few years of my life, I've really sort of leaned on anime stories mostly, but like any kind of story with like with strong moments of triumph or sorrow or loss that is done well. Just they bring tears to my eyes, and I absolutely love that can still happen, because it's really hard to do that for me. It's really hard for me to do that in real life. It's definitely grown up in the era of unknown toxic masculinity, where we thought everything was fine. We thought it was okay to tell boys that it's not all right to cry. And I know better now in my brain. I know it's better than that. I know better than that. But I have like 40 years of indoctrination that's kind of more challenging to deal with than just like, oh yeah, no, it's cool to cry. My God, these are tangents. I'm definitely dating myself with my number. I don't even know how many tangents I'm on right now, but I'm cool with that. I think I've abandoned a topic or two. I don't know. Have I covered everything? Who knows? I have some water. Anyway, something about time travel. It sucks. Yeah. So anyways, I think just before that was actually, I was talking about editing Dune videos. Yeah, 2 huge Dune Awakening streams, like 4 hours plus, both of them. And the first one, I wanted to shrink them a little bit, because I know that like excessively long VODs, people seem happy to sort of hang around and watch, or just put streams on Twitch in the background for YouTube. For YouTube, shorter videos seem to be more acceptable, like 90 minutes maybe, kind of tops. And so I wanted to make them more digestible for YouTube, because largely when I'm editing things, it goes into YouTube. I don't have affiliate yet. By the way, follow if you want to. And so I can't upload anything to Twitch. So my clips, when I noticed how poor the quality of the clips were, I decided, all right, well, I don't really want to lean on Twitch clips to sort of download from my archive and then share to YouTube Shorts. So I've just been clipping them from my video recordings. Yeah, I should use buttons somewhere. When I get in a streamer bot, I'm going to rely on marking my videos a lot more. Like every single stream I have so far, I forget to put a mark down when I flip to the just talking screen that we have here. I should call it my rambling screen. Scene, because I'm really good at rambling. I bet I'm a champion. I'm an Olympic rambler. And so every time, what I end up doing in the video clip is I rely on the audio tracks, because the sound effect from the flipping pages is very apparent on like even the fully zoomed out scale of the stream in DaVinci. So that's helpful. But it took a long time to edit those. The first one I went through and I edited out all like the running time, right? The running speed. There's a lot of that, and I managed to clip out like an hour worth of time. And this afternoon, I was like, well, today I was going to spend a lot of my day editing the second video. I spent the morning doing preparing a couple of shorts. I'm doing like short saturation now on YouTube to see how that goes. It's probably too much. I've been told one short every 2 days is supposed to be optimal, so I think I'll try that next week, and we'll see how that goes. Maybe try that for a couple of weeks next week, which means also much fewer shorts. So we'll see how that goes. Maybe that's kind of why some streamers have like multiple channels to spread out their content. Right now, I'm putting both my gaming and my reading streams on my primary channel, my only channel. And so maybe that's crowded. Maybe there's a crowded number of topics. We'll see. I probably won't care about it too much. The second video though is like 4 hour stream is what it is, and I'm just kind of like, I grabbed a short out of it, and I'm kind of done. I'm kind of done looking at it. One of my promises to myself is to not overly burden myself with this hobby, because it is a hobby and I want to enjoy it. And so far so good. If I force myself to go through video editing sessions 4 to 8 hours long, I'm going to hate it, and I don't want to do that. I'd rather have a couple of arduously overly inflated streams sitting on YouTube. It's a 40 gigabyte render, by the way. That last stream, the first one, the one before it was 33, and this is 40. These are by far the hugest renders I've done. Prior to this, I think my biggest one was 13 renders. It was 13 gigabits rendered. So, holy cow! Like, wow. I don't know where that came from. Maybe DaVinci Resolve is kind of like choking or something. I have no idea. But there you go. Yeah. Today, we are reading, and we are going to start Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I got that right. It's Mary Shelley, right? I would hate to get the author's name mixed up. Of course, the file I'm looking at doesn't tell me. It's excellent. Yeah, Mary Shelley. Here we go. It is it's public domain, so it's like, in theory, it is the original. I am ignorant of these things, of course. It is all Valana's fault if something is wrong. Please send your complaints to my manager. Thank you very much. This is, I think this has like 25 chapters in it. And we kind of figured out, we learned from reading 1948 that we eventually got up to like 3 or 4 chapters a stream. I'm going to, for the reading streams anyways, I will go and I will split up the reading streams, chapter by chapter. I added 1984 to a playlist in chunks. So there was one of them was one chapter. The end ones there were like like 4 chapters a piece, right? So we will. I think the end one was that 6 to 9. Yeah, yeah, four chapters. I was a quick one too. They were kind of shorter, but I will make each chapter its own video, and then I'll put that into the playlist over there. I think I will attempt that strategy. See if that gets more traction or visibility. But yeah, you will notice. Let's flip over to the reading pane. The reading scene. I have totally prepared the book and the poster way ahead of time. So far ahead that you wouldn't even notice me do it before this afternoon. So, and you loaded. Did I not load before I loaded? What are you talking about? You can't tell me I didn't load. I mean, if I didn't load, it would have been on the first scene. Check the book off the shelf. Yeah, of course I did. I have it here in front of me. It was prepared, as I say, well in advance. It totally wasn't done like 30 minutes ago. Why did you even think that? Exactly. You have nothing to say, no words. I understand. Just like keep moving on from that. All right. Let's start reading. I'm kind of interested. I don't know if I'm going to like it or not. I have not planned or prepped, as usual. Okay, getting live notices. All right, one more sip. I've taken my nasty throat spray. It's getting to be more tolerable, which is, nice. Pretty nice. All right, Frankenstein, chapter 1. I'll put a chapter marker in this time. I am by birth a Gene Vesey, and my family is one of the most distinguished of that republic. My ancestors had been for many years councillors and syndics, and my father had filled several public situations with honor and reputation. He was respected by all who knew him for his integrity and indefatigable attention to public business. He passed his younger days perpetually occupied by the affairs of his country. A variety of circumstances had prevented his marrying earlier, nor was it until the decline of life that he became a husband and the father of a family. As the circumstances of his marriage illustrate his character, I cannot refrain from relating them. One of his most intimate friends was a merchant who, from a flourishing state, fell, through numerous mischances, into poverty. This man, whose name was Beaufort, was of a proud and unbending disposition, and could not bear to live in poverty and oblivion in the same country where he had formerly been distinguished for his rank and magnificence. Having paid his debts, therefore, in the most honorable manner, he retreated with his daughter to the town of Lucerne, where he lived unknown and in wretchedness. My father loved Beaufort with the truest friendship, and was deeply grieved by his retreat in these unfortunate circumstances. He bitterly deplored the false pride which led his friend to a conduct so little worthy of the affection that united them. He lost no time in endeavoring to seek him out, with the hope of persuading him to begin the world again through his credit and assistance. To begin the world again. That's a big job, starting a whole world all over again. Beaufort had taken effectual measures to conceal himself, and it was 10 months before my father discovered his abode. Overjoyed at this discovery, he hastened to the house, which was situated in a mean street near the Rus. But when he entered, misery and despair alone welcomed him. Beaufort had saved but a very small sum of money from the wreck of his fortunes, but it was sufficient to provide him with sustenance for some months, and in the meantime he hoped to procure some respectable employment in a merchant's house. The interval was consequently spent in inaction. His grief only became more deep and rankling when he had the leisure for reflection. And at length it took so fast hold of his mind that at the end of 3 months he lay on a bed of sickness, incapable of any exertion. His daughter attended him with the greatest tenderness, but she saw with despair that their little fund was rapidly decreasing, and that there was no other prospect of support. But Caroline Beaufort possessed a mind of an uncommon mold, and her courage rose to support her in her adversity. She procured plain work, she plaited straw, and by various means contrived to earn a pittance scarcely sufficient to support life. Several months passed in this manner. Her father grew worse. Her time was more entirely occupied in attending him. Her means of subsistence decreased, and in the 10th month her father died in her arms, leaving her an orphan and a beggar. This last blow overcame her, and she knelt by Beaufort's coffin, weeping bitterly. When my father entered the chamber, he came like a protecting spirit to the poor girl, who committed herself to his care, and after the interment of his friend, he conducted her to Geneva and placed her under the protection of a relation. 2 years after this event, Caroline became his wife. There was a considerable difference between the ages of my parents, but this circumstance seemed to unite them only closer in bonds of devoted affection. There was a sense of justice in my father's upright mind which rendered it necessary that he should approve highly to love strongly. Perhaps during former years he had suffered from the late discovered unworthiness of one beloved, and so was disposed to set a greater value on untried worth. There was a show of gratitude and worship in his attachment to my mother, differing wholly from the doting fondness of age, for it was inspired by reverence for her virtues, and a desire to be the means of, in some degree, recompensing her for the sorrows she had endured, but which gave inexpressible grace to his behavior to her. Everything was made to yield to her wishes and her convenience. He strove to shelter her as far as a fair exotic is sheltered by the gardener from every rougher wind, and to surround her with all that he could tend to excite pleasurable emotion in her soft and benevolent mind. Her health and the tranquility of her hitherto constant spirit had been shaken by what she had gone through. During the 2 years that had elapsed previous to their marriage, my father had gradually relinquished all his public functions, and immediately after their union they sought the pleasant climate of Italy, and the change of scene and interest attended on a tour through that land of wonders as restorative for her weakened frame. From Italy they visited Germany and France. I, their eldest child, was born in Naples, and as an infant accompanied them in their rambles. I remained for several years their only child. Much as they were attached to each other, they seemed to draw inexhaustible stores of affection from a very mine of love to bestow them upon me. My mother's tender caresses and my father's smile of benevolent pleasure while regarding me are my first recollections. I was their plaything and their idol, and something better, their child, the innocent and helpless creature bestowed upon them by heaven, whom to bring up to good, and whose future lot it was in their hands to direct to happiness or misery, according as they fulfilled their duties towards me. With this deep consciousness of what they owed towards the being to which they had given life, added to the active spirit of tenderness that animated both, it may be imagined that while during every hour of my infant life I received a lesson of patience, of charity, and of self-control, I was so guided by a silken cord that all seemed but one train of enjoyment to me. For a long time I was their only care. My mother had much desired to have a daughter, but I continued their single offspring. When I was about 5 years old, while making an excursion beyond the frontiers of Italy, they passed a week on the shores of the Lake of Como. Their benevolent disposition often made them enter the cottages of the poor. This, to my mother, was more than a duty. It was a necessity, a passion, remembering what she had suffered and how she had been relieved, for her to act, in her turn, the guardian angel to the afflicted. During one of their walks, a poor cot in the foldings of a veil attracted their notice as being singularly disconsolate. Disconsolate? Several words enter my mind at the same time. While the number of half-clothed children gathered about it spoke of penury in its worst shape, one day, when my father had gone by himself to Milan, my mother, accompanied by me, visited this abode. She found a peasant and his wife, hard-working, bent down by care and labor, distributing a scanty meal to 5 hungry babes. Among these there was one which attracted my mother far above all the rest. She appeared of a different stock. The 4 others were dark-eyed, hardy little vagrants. This child was thin and very fair. Her hair was the brightest living gold, and, despite the poverty of her clothing, seemed to set a crown of distinction on her head. Her brow was clear and ample, and her blue eyes cloudless, and her lips and the molding of her face so expressive of sensibility and sweetness that none could behold her without looking on her as of a distinct species, a heaven sent and bearing a celestial stamp in all her features. The peasant woman, perceiving that my mother fixed eyes of wonder and admiration on this lovely girl, eagerly communicated her history. She was not her child, but the daughter of a Milanese nobleman. Her mother was a German and had died on giving her birth. The infant had been placed with these good people to nurse. They were better off then. They had not been long married, and their eldest child was but just born. The father of their charge was one of those Italians nursed in the memory of the antique glory of Italy, one among, the Schiavi Ognor Fermenti. I guess that's Italian. Who exerted himself to obtain the liberty of his country. He became the victim of its weakness. Whether he had died or still lingered in the dungeons of Austria was not known. His property was confiscated. His child became an orphan and a beggar. She continued with her foster parents and bloomed in their rude abode, fairer than a garden rose among dark-leaved brambles. When my father returned from Milan, he found playing with me in the hall of our villa a child fairer than a pictured cherub, a creature who seemed to shed radiance from her looks, and whose form and motions were lighter than the chamois. Than the Camois Hills? That's Chamois, isn't it? I think it's Chamois of the Hills. I'm probably wrong, though. Yes, I am wrong. Okay, thank you. The apparition was soon explained. With his permission, my mother prevailed on her rustic guardians to yield her charge to her. They were fond of the sweet orphan. Her presence had seemed a blessing to them, but it would be unfair to her to keep her in poverty and want, when Providence afforded her such powerful protection. They consulted their village priest, and the result was that Elizabeth Lavenza became the inmate of my parents' house. My more than sister, the beautiful and adored companion of all my occupations and my pleasures. Everyone loved Elizabeth. The passionate and almost reverential attachment by which all regarded her became, while I shared it, my pride and my delight. On the evening previous to her being brought to my home, my mother had said playfully, "I have a pretty present for my Victor. Tomorrow he shall have it." And when, on the morrow, she presented Elizabeth to me as her promised gift, I, with childish seriousness, interpreted her words literally, and looked upon Elizabeth as mine to protect, love, and cherish. All praises bestowed on her I received as made to a possession of my own. We called each other familiarly by the name of cousin. No word, no expression could body forth the kind of relation in which she stood to me, my more than sister, since till death she was to be mine only. I'm not sure that Elizabeth is better off. That's kind of a little disturbing. I think that's going to be a common theme from books that are from long ago. The cultures are, I mean, I guess that would be normal to the day and age. I'm not an expert on that, though. That was the end of chapter 1. Chapter 2. We were brought up together. There was not quite a year difference in our ages. I need not say that we were strangers to any species of disunion or dispute. Harmony was the soul of our companionship, and the diversity and contrast that subsisted in our characters drew us nearer together. Elizabeth was of a calmer and more concentrated disposition, but with all my ardor, I was capable of a more intense application, and was more deeply smitten with the thirst for knowledge. It means love. Should just say loved it. She busied herself with following the aerial creations of the poets, and in the majestic and wondrous scenes which surrounded our Swiss home, the sublime shapes of the mountains, the changes of the seasons, tempest and calm, the silence of winter, and the life and turbulence of our alpine summers. She found ample scope for admiration and delight. While my companion contemplated with a serious and satisfied spirit the magnificent appearance of things, I delighted in investigating their causes. The world was to me a secret which I desired to divine. Curiosity, earnest research to learn the hidden laws of nature, gladness akin to rapture, as they were unfolded to me, are among the earliest sensations I can remember. On the birth of a second son, my junior by 7 years, my parents gave up entirely their wandering life and fixed themselves in their native country. We possessed a house in Geneva and a campaign on Bellerive. Okay, a campaign. Were they political? And a campaign on Bellerive, the eastern shore of the lake, at the distance of rather more than a league from the city. We resided principally in the latter, and the lives of my parents were passed in considerable seclusion. It was my temper to avoid a crowd and to attach myself fervently to a few. I was indifferent, therefore, to my schoolfellows in general, but I united myself in the bonds of the closest friendship to one among them. Henry Clerval was the son of a merchant of Geneva. He was a boy of singular talent and fancy. He loved enterprise, hardship, and even danger for its own sake. He was deeply read in the books of chivalry and romance. He composed heroic songs and began to write many a tale of enchantment and knightly adventure. He tried to make us act plays and to enter into masquerades in which the characters were drawn from the heroes of Roncesvalles. I'm like focusing on English constructed syllables, and that's just messing me up. Roncesvalles, that's how it's going to be. Of the round table of King Arthur, and the chivalrous train who shed their blood to redeem the holy sepulchre from the hands of the infidels. Yeah. Anyways, words. Who needs them? No human being could have passed a happier childhood than myself. My parents were possessed by the very spirit of kindness and indulgence. We felt that they were not the tyrants to rule our lot according to their caprice, but the agents and creators of all the many delights which we enjoyed. When I mingled with other families, I distinctly discerned how peculiarly fortunate my lot was, and gratitude assisted the development of my filial love. My temper was sometimes violent, and my passions vehement, but by some law in my temperature they were turned, not towards childish pursuits, but to an eager desire to learn, and not to learn all things indiscriminately. I confess that neither the structure of languages, nor the code of governments, nor the politics of various states possessed attractions for me. It was the secrets of heaven and earth that I desired to learn, and whether it was the outward substance of things, or the inner spirit of nature and the mysterious soul of man that occupied me, still my inquiries were directed to the metaphysical, or, in its highest sense, the physical secrets of the world. Meanwhile, Clerval occupied himself, so to speak, with the moral relations of things. The busy stage of life, the virtues of heroes, and the actions of men were his theme, and his hope and his dream was to become one amongst those whose names are recorded in story, as the gallant and adventurous benefactors of our species. The saintly soul of Elizabeth shone like a shrine dedicated lamp in our peaceful home. Her sympathy was ours, her smile, her soft voice, the sweet glance of her celestial eyes were ever there to bless and animate us. She was the living spirit of love to soften and attract. I might have become sullen in my study, rough through the ardor of my nature, but that she was there to subdue me to a semblance of her own gentleness. And Clerval could aught ill entrench on the noble spirit of Clerval, yet he might not have been so perfectly humane, so thoughtful in his generosity, so full of kindness and tenderness amidst his passion for adventurous exploit, had she not unfolded to him the real loveliness of beneficence and made the doing good the end and the aim of his soaring ambition. I feel exquisite pleasure in dwelling on the recollections of childhood, before misfortune had tainted my mind and changed its bright visions of extensive usefulness into gloomy and narrow reflections upon myself. Reflections upon self. Besides, in drawing the picture of my early days, I also record those events which led, by insensible steps, to my aftertale of misery. For when I would account to myself for the birth of that passion which afterwards ruled my destiny, I find it arise, like a mountain river from ignoble and almost forgotten sources. But, swelling as it proceeded, it became the torrent which, in its course, had swept away all my hopes and joys. Natural philosophy is the genius that had regulated my fate. I desire, therefore, in this narration, to state those facts which led to my predilection for that science. When I pause quietly like that, I am looking at a word that just tumbled across my tongue, like it has offended me, and I glare at it. Predilection is probably closer to how that's supposed to be said. When I was 13 years of age, we all went on a party of pleasure to the baths near Thonon. Thonon? The inclemency of the weather obliged us to remain a day confined to the inn. In this house, I chanced to find a volume of the works of Cornelius Agrippa. I opened it with apathy. The theory which he attempts to demonstrate and the wonderful facts which he relates soon changed this feeling into enthusiasm. A new light seemed to draw upon my mind, and bounding with joy, I communicated my discovery to my father. My father looked carelessly at the title of the page, at the title page of my book and said, "Ah, Cornelius Agrippa, my dear Victor, do not waste your time upon this. It is sad trash." If, instead of this remark, my father had taken the pains to explain to me that the principles of Agrippa had been entirely exploded, and that a modern system of science had been introduced, which possessed a much greater powers than the ancient, because of the powers of the latter were chimerical, while those of the former were real and practical. Under such circumstances, I should certainly have thrown Agrippa aside, and have contented my imagination, warmed as it was, by returning with greater ardor to my former studies. It is even possible that the train of my ideas would never have received the fatal impulse that led to my ruin. But the cursory glance my father had taken of my volume by no means assured me that he was acquainted with its contents, and I continued to read with the greatest avidity. The butterfly effect, I guess. When I returned home, my first care was to procure the whole works of this author, and afterwards of Paracelsus and Albertus Magnus. This is starting to sound like a Warhammer 40k book. I read and studied the wild fancies of these writers with delight. They appeared to me treasures known to a few beside myself. I have described myself as always having been imbued with a fervent longing to penetrate the secrets of nature. In spite of the intense labor and wonderful discoveries of modern philosophers, I always came from my studies discontented and unsatisfied. Sir Isaac Newton is said to have avowed that he felt like a child picking up shells beside the great and unexplored ocean of truth. Those of his successors in each branch of natural philosophy with whom I was acquainted appeared, even to my boy's apprehensions, as tyros engaged in the same pursuit. The untaught peasant beheld the elements around him, and was acquainted with their practical uses. The most learned philosopher knew little more. He had partially unveiled the face of nature, but her immortal lineaments were still a wonder and a mystery. He might dissect, anatomize, and give names, but no, not to speak of a final cause. Causes in their secondary and tertiary grades were utterly unknown to him. I had gazed upon the fortifications and impediments that seemed to keep human beings from entering the citadel of nature, and rashly and ignorantly I had repined. But here were books, and here were men who had penetrated deeper and knew more. I took their word for all that they averred ever read. Dear Lord, I took their word for all that they averred, and I became their disciple. It may appear strange that such should arise in the 18th century, but while I followed the routine of education in the schools of Geneva, I was to a great degree self-taught with regard to my favorite studies. My father was not scientific, and I was left to struggle with a child's blindness added to a student's thirst for knowledge. Under the guidance of my new preceptors, I entered with the greatest diligence into the search for the philosopher's stone and the elixir of life, but the latter soon obtained my undivided attention. Wealth was an inferior object, but what glory would attend the discovery if I could banish disease from the human frame and render man invulnerable to any but a violent death. Nor were these my only visions. The raising of ghosts or devils was a promise liberally accorded to my favorite authors, the fulfillment of which I most eagerly sought, and if my incantations were always unsuccessful, I attributed the failure rather to my own inexperience and mistake than to a want of skill or fidelity in my instructors. And thus, for a time, I was occupied by exploded systems, mingling like an unadept, a thousand contradictory theories, and floundering desperately in a very slough of multifarious knowledge. Slough? It's Sloughh. It makes me think of like sloughing off skin, like horrible thought that is. In a very slough of multifarious knowledge. I guess he's like essentially drowning in all sorts of different types of knowledge. Anyways, to stop. Oh, hello, Misty. It is icky, yes. Please ignore that part. Thank you for joining me. Let's see. Floundering desperately in a very slough of multifarious knowledge, guided by an ardent imagination and childish reasoning, till an accident again changed the current of my ideas. When I was about 15 years old, we had retired to our house near Bellerive, when we had witnessed a most violent and terrible thunderstorm. It advanced from behind the mountains of Jura, and in the thunder burst at once with frightful loudness from various quarters of the heavens. I remained, while the storm lasted, watching its progress with curiosity and delight. As I stood at the door, on a sudden I beheld a stream of fire issue from an old and beautiful oak which stood about 20 yards from our house. And so soon as the dazzling light vanished, the oak had disappeared, and nothing remained but a blasted stump. When we visited it the next morning, we found the tree shattered in a singular manner. It was not splintered by the shock, but entirely reduced to thin ribbons of wood. I never beheld anything so utterly destroyed. Before this, I was not unacquainted with the more obvious laws of electricity. On this occasion, a man of great research in natural philosophy was with us, and, excited by this catastrophe, he entered on the explanation of a theory which he had formed on the subject of electricity and galvanism, which was at once new and astonishing to me. All that he had said threw greatly into the shade Cornelius Agrippa, Albertus Magnus, and Paracelsus. Oh God, I put a T in there. The lords of my imagination, but by some fatality, the overthrow of these men disinclined me to pursue my accustomed studies. It seemed to me as if those caprices of the mind, which we are perhaps most subject to in early youth, I at once gave up my former occupations, set down natural history and all its progeny as a deformed and abortive creature, and entered the greatest disdain for a would-be science, which could never even step within the threshold of real knowledge. In this mood of mind, I betook myself to the mathematics and the branches of study appertaining to that science, as being built upon secure foundations and so worthy of my consideration. Thus, strangely are our souls constructed, and by such slight ligaments we are bound to prosperity or ruin. When I look back, it seems to me as if this almost miraculous change of inclination and will was the immense suggestion of a guardian angel of my life, the last effort made by the spirit of preservation to avert the storm that was even then hanging in the stars and ready to envelop me. Her victory was announced by an unusual tranquility and gladness of soul, which followed the relinquishing of my ancient and latterly tormenting studies. It was thus that I was to be taught to associate evil with their prosecution, happiness with their disregard. It was a strong effort of the spirit of good, but it was ineffectual. Destiny was too potent, and her immutable laws had decreed my utter and terrible destruction. These chapters burn through fast, Valena. Might need a new book by the next stream. Chapter 3. When I had attained the age of 17, my parents resolved that I should become a student at the University of Ingolstadt. I haven't looked at that new list yet. I will have to look into that soon, though. I had hitherto attended the schools of Geneva, but my father thought it necessary for the completion of my education that I should be made acquainted with other customs than those of my native country. My departure was therefore fixed at an early date. But before the day resolved upon could arrive, the first misfortune of my life occurred, an omen, as it were, of my future misery. Elizabeth had caught the scarlet fever. Her illness was severe, and she was in the greatest danger. During her illness, many arguments had been urged to persuade my mother to refrain from attending upon her. She had at first yielded to our entreaties, but when she heard that the life of her favorite was menaced, she could no longer control her anxiety. She attended her sickbed. Her watchful attentions triumphed over the malignity of the distemper. Elizabeth was saved, but the consequences of this imprudence were fatal to her preserver. On the third day, my mother sickened. Her fever was accompanied by the most alarming symptoms, and the looks of her medical attendants prognosticated the worst event. On her deathbed, the fortitude and benignity. Oh my God, it's like benign, but it's a nitty at the end. Benignity. Dear Lord, of this best of women did not desert her. She joined the hands of Elizabeth and myself. My children, she said, my firmest hopes of future happiness were placed on the prospect of your union. This expectation will now be the consolation of your father. Elizabeth, my love, you must supply my place to my younger children. Alas, I regret that I am taken from you, and happy and beloved as I have been, it is not hard to quit you at all. But these are not thoughts befitting me. I will endeavor to resign myself cheerfully to death, and will indulge a hope of meeting you in another world. She died calmly, and her countenance expressed affection even in death. I did not describe the feelings of those whose dearest ties are rent by that most irreparable evil, the void that presents itself to the soul, and the despair that is exhibited on the countenance. It is so long before the mind can persuade itself that she, whom we saw every day, and whose very existence appeared a part of our own, can have departed forever, that the brightness of a beloved eye can have been extinguished, and the sound of a voice so familiar and dear to the ear can be hushed, never more to be heard. These are the reflections of the first days. But when the lapse of time proves that the reality of the evil, then the actual bitterness of grief commences. Yet from whom has not that rude hand rent away some dear connection? And why should I describe a sorrow which all have felt and must feel? The time at length arrives when grief is rather an indulgence than a necessity, and the smile that plays upon the lips, although it may be deemed a sacrilege, is not banished. My mother was dead, but we had still duties which we ought to perform, and must continue our course with the rest, and learn to think ourselves fortunate, whilst one remains whom the spoiler has not seized. My departure for Ingolstadt, which had been deferred by these events, was now again determined upon. I obtained from my father a respite of some weeks. It appeared to me sacrilege so soon to leave the repose akin to death, and of the house of mourning, to rush into the thick of life. I was new to sorrow, but it did not the less alarm me. I was unwilling to quit the sight of those that remained to me, and above all, I desired to see my sweet Elizabeth in some degree consoled. She indeed veiled her grief and strove to act the comforter to us all. She looked steadily on life and assumed its duties with courage and zeal. She devoted herself to those whom she had been taught to call her uncle and cousins. Never was she so enchanting as at this time, when she recalled the sunshine of her smiles and spent them upon us. She forgot even her own regret in her endeavors to make us forget. The day of my departure at length arrived. Clerval spent the last evening with us. He had endeavored to persuade his father to permit him to accompany me and to become my fellow student, but in vain. His father was a narrow-minded trader and saw idleness and ruin in the aspirations and ambition of his son. Henry deeply felt the misfortune of being debarred from a liberal education. He said little, but when he spoke, I read in his kindling eye and the animated glance a restrained but firm resolve not to be chained to the miserable details of commerce. We sat late. We could not tear ourselves away from each other, nor persuade ourselves to say the word farewell. It was said, and we retired under the pretense of seeking repose, each fancying that the other was deceived. But when at morning's dawn I descended to the carriage which was to convey me away, they were all there. My father again to bless me, Clerval to press my hand once more, my Elizabeth to renew her entreaties that I would write often, and to bestow the last feminine attentions on her playmate and friend. I can't imagine my voice terribly suits League of Legends, but that is amazing. I'm glad you're enjoying it, Misty. Where was I threw myself into the chase that was to convey me away, and indulged in the most melancholy reflections. I, who had ever been surrounded by amiable companions, continually engaged in endeavoring to bestow mutual pleasure, I was now alone in the university, whither I was going. I must form my own friends, and be my own protector. My life had hitherto been remarkably secluded and domestic, and this had given me invincible repugnance to new countenances. I loved my brothers, Elizabeth and Clerval. These were old familiar faces, but I believed myself totally unfitted for the company of strangers. Such were my reflections as I commenced my journey, but as I proceeded my spirits and hopes rose. I ardently desired the acquisition of knowledge. I had often, when at home, thought it hard to remain during my youth cooped up in one place, and had longed to enter the world and take my station among other human beings. Now my desires were compiled with, and it would indeed have been folly to repent. Sorry, complied with. It literally says compiled. Like I took computer science. I know what compiled looks like. I had sufficient leisure for these and many other reflections during my journey to Ingolstadt, which was long and fatiguing. At length, the high, white steeple of the town met my eyes. I alighted and was conducted to my solitary apartment to spend the evening as I pleased. The next morning, I delivered my letters of introduction and paid a visit to some of the principal professors. Chance, or rather the evil influence, the angel of destruction, which had asserted my omnipotent sway over me from the moment I turned my reluctant steps from my father's door, led me first to M. Kremp, professor of natural philosophy. He was an uncouth man, but deeply imbued in the secrets of his science. He asked me several questions concerning my progress in the different branches of science appertaining to natural philosophy. I replied carelessly and partly in contempt, mentioning the names of my alchemists as the principal authors I had studied. The professor stared. "Have you," he said, "really spent your time in studying such nonsense?" The arrogant student. I find it interesting that the book is referring to the sciences as philosophies. Like, that's something that used to happen. I think today, we define philosophies as sort of the precursor to science, rather than strictly being sciences themselves, which I think is really cool, just as an aside. I replied in the affirmative. "Every minute," continued Mr. Kremp with warmth, "every instant that you have wasted on those books is utterly and entirely lost. You have burdened your memory with exploded systems and useless names. Good God, in what desert land have you lived, where no one was kind enough to inform you that these fancies, which you have so greedily imbibed, are 1,000 years old, and as musty as they are ancient? I little expected in this enlightened and scientific age to find a disciple of Albertus Magnus and Paracelsus. My dear sir, you must begin your studies entirely anew." So saying, he stepped aside and wrote down a list of several books treating of natural philosophy, which he desired me to procure, and dismissed me. After mentioning that in the beginning of the following week he intended to commence a course of lectures upon natural philosophy in its general relations, and that M. Waldman, fellow professor, would lecture upon chemistry and the alternate days that he omitted. I returned home, not disappointed, for I have said that I had long considered those authors useless whom the professor reprobated, but I returned, not at all the more inclined to recur to these studies in any shape. M. Kremp was a little squat man, with a gruff voice and a repulsive countenance. The teacher, therefore, did not prepossess me in favor of his pursuits. In rather a too philosophical and connected a strain, perhaps, I have given an account of the conclusions I had come to concerning them in my early years. As a child, I had not been content with the results promised by the modern professors of natural science, with the confusion of ideas only to be accounted for by my extreme youth and my want of a guide on such matters. I had retrod the steps of knowledge along the paths of time, and exchanged the discoveries of recent inquirers for the dreams of forgotten alchemists. Besides, I had a contempt for the uses of modern natural philosophy. It was very different when the masters of the science sought immortality and power. Such views, although futile, were grand. But now the scene was changed. The ambition of the inquirer seemed to limit itself to the annihilation of those visions on which my interest in science was chiefly founded. I was required to exchange chimeras of boundless grandeur for the realities of little worth. Headphone just beeped at me, so I'm going to mute and change the battery. It is a hot swappable battery. I won't be long. Okay, there we go. That normally happens during work meetings with my manager. It's an amusing little event we enjoy. Where were we? I was required to exchange chimeras of boundless grandeur for realities of little worth. Such were my reflections during the first 2 or 3 days of my residence at Ingolstadt, which were chiefly spent in becoming acquainted with the localities and the principal residents of my new abode. But as the ensuing week commenced, I thought of the information which M. Kremp had given me concerning the lectures, and although I could not consent to go and hear that little conceited fellow deliver sentences out of a pulpit, I recollected what he had said of M. Waldman, whom I had never seen, as he had hitherto been out of town. Partly from curiosity, and partly from idleness, I went to the lecturing, which M. Waldman entered shortly after. This professor was very unlike his colleague. He appeared about 50 years of age, but with an aspect expressive of the greatest benevolence. A few gray hairs covered his temples, but those at the back of his head were nearly black. His person was not short but remarkably erect, and his voice the sweetest I had ever heard. He began his lecture by a recapitulation of the history of chemistry and the various improvements made by different men of learning, pronouncing with fervor the names of the most distinguished discoverers. He then took a cursory view of the present state of the science and explained many of its elementary terms. After having made a few preparatory experiments, he concluded with a panegyric? He concluded with a panegyric upon modern chemistry, the terms of which I shall never forget. I said that word with pride, but only because I was amused by how wrong I probably am. I love old words. They just hate me. The ancient teachers of this science, he said, promised impossibilities and performed nothing. The modern masters promise very little. They know that metals cannot be transmuted, and the elixir of life is a chimera, but these philosophers whose hands seem only made to dabble in dirt, and their eyes to pore over the microscope or crucible, have indeed performed miracles. They penetrate into the recesses of nature and show how she works in her hiding places. They ascend into the heavens, and they have discovered how the blood circulates and the nature of the air we breathe, and have acquired new and almost unlimited powers. They can command the thunders of heaven, mimic the earthquake, and even mock the invisible world with its own shadows. Such were the professor's words. Rather, let me say, such the words of fate. Such the words of fate, I guess so, announced to destroy me. As he went on, I felt as if my soul were grappling with a palpable enemy. One by one, the various keys were touched which form the mechanism of my being. Chord after chord was sounded, and soon my mind was filled with one thought, one conception, one purpose. So much has been done, exclaimed the soul of Frankenstein. More, far more, will I achieve. Treading in the steps already marked, I will pioneer a new way, explore unknown powers, and unfold to the world the deepest mysteries of creation. I closed not my eyes that night. My internal being was in a state of insurrection and turmoil. I felt that order would thence arise, but I had no power to produce it. By degrees, after the morning's dawn, sleep came. I awoke, and my yesternight's thoughts were as a dream. There only remained a resolution to return to my ancient studies and to devote myself to a science for which I believed myself to possess a natural talent. On the same day, I paid Mr. Waldman a visit. His manners in private were even more mild and attractive than in public, for there was a certain dignity in his mien during his lecture, which in his own house was replaced by the greatest affability and kindness. I gave him pretty nearly the same account of my former pursuits as I had given to his fellow professor. He heard with attention the little narration concerning my studies, and smiled at the names of Cornelius Agrippa and Paracelsus, but without the contempt that M. Krempe had exhibited. He said, "These were men to whose indefatigable zeal modern philosophers were indebted for most of the foundations of their knowledge. They had left to us as an easier task to give new names and arrange in connected classifications the facts which they had in a great degree had been the instruments of bringing to light. Despite my fumbling, he was giving them a lot of credit. Upon the shoulders of giants, so to speak. The labors of men of genius, however erroneously directed, scarcely ever fail in ultimately turning to the solid advantage of mankind." I listened to his statement, which was delivered without any presumption or affectation, and then added that his lecture had removed my prejudices against modern chemists. I expressed myself in measured terms, with the modesty and deference due from a youth to his instructor, without letting escape. Inexperience in life would have made me ashamed any of the enthusiasm which stimulated my intended labors. I requested his advice concerning the books I ought to procure. "I am happy," said Mr. Waldman, "to have gained a disciple, and if your application equals your ability, I have no doubt of your success. Chemistry is that branch of natural philosophy in which the greatest improvements have been and may be made. It is on that account that I have made it my peculiar study, but at the same time I have not neglected the other branches of science. A man would make but a very sorry chemist if he attended to that department of human knowledge alone. If your wish is to become really a man of science and not merely a petty experimentalist, I should advise you to apply to every branch of natural philosophy, including mathematics." He then took me into his laboratory and explained to me the uses of his various machines, instructing me as to what I ought to procure, and promising me the use of his own when I should have advanced far enough in the science not to derange their mechanism. He also gave me the list of books which I had requested, and I took my leave. Thus ended a day memorable to me. It decided my future destiny. Thus ends another chapter. Okay. Chapter 4. From this day, natural philosophy, and particularly chemistry, in the most comprehensive sense of the term, became nearly my sole occupation. I read with ardor those words so full of genius and discrimination which modern inquirers have written on these subjects. I attended the lectures and cultivated the acquaintance of the men of science of the university, and I found even in M. Krempe a great deal of sound sense and real information, combined, it is true, with a repulsive physiognomy, there you go, and manners, but not on that account the less valuable. In M. Waldman I found a true friend. His gentleness was never tinged by dogmatism, and his instructions were given with an air of frankness and good nature that banished every idea of pedantry. In 1,000 ways, he smoothed for me the path of knowledge and made the most abstruse inquiries clear and facile and facilely to my apprehension. My application was at first fluctuating and uncertain. It gained strength as I proceeded and soon became so ardent and eager that the stars often disappeared in the light of morning whilst I was yet engaged in my laboratory. As I applied so closely, it may be easily conceived that my progress was rapid. My ardor was indeed the astonishment of the students, and my proficiency that of the masters. Professor Kremp often asked me with a sly smile how Cornelius Agrippa went on, whilst M. Waldman expressed the most heartfelt exultation in my progress. 2 years passed in this manner, during which I paid no visit to Geneva, but was engaged heart and soul in the pursuit of some discoveries which I had hoped to make. None but those who have experienced them can conceive of the enticements of science. In other studies, you go as far as others have gone before you, and there is nothing more to know, but in the scientific pursuit there is continual food for discovery and wonder. A mind of moderate capacity which closely pursues one study must infallibly arrive at great proficiency in that study, and I, who continually sought the attainment of one object of pursuit, and was solely wrapped up in this, improved so rapidly that, at the end of 2 years, I made some discoveries in the improvement of some chemical instruments which procured me great esteem and admiration at the university. I had arrived at this point, I had become as well acquainted with the theory and practice of natural philosophy as depended on the lessons of any of the professors at Ingolstadt, my residence there being no longer conducive to my improvement. I thought of returning to my friends and my native town, when an incident happened that protracted my stay. Can you imagine? You determine when you've passed your degree. You don't have a degree, I guess. You have the ability to claim study for a certain period of time in a certain place, perhaps. That would have been a much easier degree at university. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm totally passed now. I'm done. I am totally qualified for all the things. Thank you. Yeah, I'm a PhD. How long did you spend there? Doesn't matter. I went there for a minimum of a day. I qualify. I feel like I'm done. One of the phenomena which had particularly attracted my attention was the structure of the human frame, and indeed any animal endued with life. Whence, I often ask myself, did the principle of life proceed? It was a bold question, and one which has never been considered as a mystery. Yet with how many things we are upon the brink of becoming acquainted, if cowardice or carelessness did not restrain our inquiries. Oh man, the pacing of that sentence was messed up. It was a bold question, and one which has ever been considered as a mystery. And yet, how many things are we upon the brink of becoming acquainted, if cowardice or carelessness did not restrain our inquiries? I revolved these circumstances in my mind, and determined thenceforth to apply myself more particularly to those branches of natural philosophy which relate to physiology. Unless I had been animated by an almost supernatural enthusiasm, my application to the study would have been irksome and almost intolerable. To examine the causes of life, we must first have recourse to death. I became acquainted with the science of anatomy, but this was not sufficient. I must also observe the natural decay and corruption of the human body. In my education, my father had taken the greatest precautions that my mind should be impressed with no supernatural horrors. I do not ever remember to have trembled at a tale of superstition or to have feared the apparition of a spirit. Darkness had no effect upon my fancy, and a churchyard was to me merely the receptacle of bodies deprived of life, which, from being the seat of beauty and strength, had become food for the worm. Now I was led to examine the cause and progress of this decay, and forced to spend days and nights in vaults and charnel houses. My attention was fixed upon every object the most insupportable to the delicacy of the human feelings. I saw how the fine form of man was degraded and wasted. I beheld the corruption of death succeeded to the blooming cheek of life. I saw how the worm inherited the wonders of the eye and brain. I paused, examining and analyzing all the minutiae of causation as exemplified in the change from life to death and death to life, until from the midst of this darkness a sudden light broke in upon me, a light so brilliant and wondrous yet so simple, that while I became dizzy with the immensity of the prospect with which it illustrated, I was surprised that amongst so many men of genius who had directed their inquiries towards the same science, that I alone should be reserved to discover so astonishing a secret. Remember, I am not recording the vision of a madman. The sun does not more certainly shine in the heavens than that which I now affirm is true. Some miracle might have produced it, yet the stages of the discovery were distinct and probable. After days and nights of incredible labor and fatigue, I succeeded in discovering the cause of generation of life. Nay, more, I became myself capable of bestowing animation upon lifeless matter. The astonishment which I had at first experienced on this discovery soon gave place to delight and rapture. After so much time spent in painful labor, to arrive at once at the summit of my desires was the most gratifying consummation of my toils. But this discovery was so great and overwhelming that all the steps by which I had been progressively led to it were obliterated, and I beheld only the result. That's convenient. What had been the study and desires of the wisest men since the creation of the world was now within my grasp. Not that, like a magic scene, it all opened up upon me at once. The information I had obtained was of a nature rather to direct my endeavors so soon as I should point them towards the object of my search, than to exhibit that object already accomplished. I was like the Arabian who had been buried with the dead and found a passage to life, aided only by one glimmering and seemingly ineffectual light. I see by your eagerness and the wonder and hope which your eyes express, my friend, that you expect to be informed of the secret with which I am acquainted. That cannot be. Listen patiently until the end of my story, and you will easily perceive why I am reserved upon that subject. I will not lead you on, unguarded and ardent as I then was, to your destruction and infallible misery. Learn from me, if not by my precepts, at least by my example, how dangerous is the acquirement of knowledge, and how much happier that man is who believes his native town to be the world, than he who aspires to become greater than his nature will allow. When I found so astonishing a power placed within my hands, I hesitated a long time concerning the manner in which I should employ it. Although I possessed the capacity of bestowing animation, yet to prepare a frame for the reception of it, with all its intricacies of fibers, muscles, and veins, still remained a work of inconceivable difficulty and labor. I doubted at first whether I should attempt the creation of a being like myself, or one of simpler organization. But my imagination was too much exalted by my first success to permit me to doubt of my ability to give life to an animal as complex and wonderful as man. The materials at present within my command hardly appeared adequate to so arduous an undertaking, but I doubted not that I should ultimately succeed. I had prepared myself for a multitude of reverses. My operations might be incessantly baffled, and at last my work be imperfected. Yet when I considered the improvement which every day takes place in science and mechanics, I was encouraged to hope my present attempts would at least lay the foundations of future success. Nor could I consider the magnitude and complexity of my plan as any argument of its impracticability. It was with these feelings that I began the creation of a human being. As the minuteness of the parts formed a great hindrance to my speed, I resolved, contrary to my first intention, to make the being of a gigantic stature. That is to say, about 8 feet in height and proportionally large. After having formed this determination, and having spent some months in successfully collecting and arranging my materials, I began. No one can conceive the variety of feelings which bore me onwards, like a hurricane, in the first enthusiasm of success. Life and death appeared to me ideal bounds, which I should first break through, and pour a torrent of light into our dark world. A new species would bless me as its creator and source. Many happy and excellent natures would owe their being to me. No father could claim the gratitude of his child so completely as I should deserve theirs. Pursuing these reflections, I thought that if I could bestow animation upon lifeless matter, I might, in process of time, although I now found it impossible, renew life where death had apparently devoted the body to corruption. These thoughts supported my spirits. While I pursued my undertaking with unremitting ardor, my cheek had grown pale with study, and my person had become emaciated with confinement. Sometimes, on the very brink of certainty, I failed. Yet still I clung to the hope which the next day or the next hour might realize. One secret which I possessed was the hope to which I had dedicated myself, and the moon gazed on my midnight labors, while with unrelaxed and breathless eagerness I pursued nature to her hiding places. Who shall conceive the horrors of my secret toil as I dabbled among the unhallowed damps of the grave, or tortured the living animal to animate the lifeless clay? My limbs now tremble and my eyes swim with the remembrance, but then a resistless and almost frantic impulse urged me forward. I seemed to have lost all soul or sensation but for this one pursuit. It was indeed but a passing trance that only made me feel with renewed acuteness so soon as, the unnatural stimulus ceasing to operate, I had returned to my old habits. I collected bones from charnel houses, and disturbed with profane fingers the tremendous secrets of the human frame. In a solitary chamber, or rather cell, at the top of the house and separated from all the other apartments by a gallery and staircase. I kept my workshop of filthy creation. My eyeballs were staring from their sockets in attending to the details of my employment. The dissecting room and the slaughterhouse furnished many of my materials, and often did my human nature turn with loathing from my occupation, whilst, still urged on by an eagerness which perpetually increased, I brought my work near to a conclusion. The summer months passed while I was thus engaged, heart and soul, in one pursuit. It was a most beautiful season. Never did the fields bestow a more plentiful harvest, or the vines yield a more luxuriant vintage, but my eyes were insensible to the charms of nature. And the same feelings which made me neglect the scenes around me caused me to forget those friends who were so many miles absent, and whom I had not seen for so long a time. I knew my silence disquieted them, and I well remembered the words of my father. I know that while you are pleased with yourself, You will think of us with affection, and we shall hear regularly from you. You must pardon me if I regard any interruption in your correspondence as a proof that your other duties are equally neglected. I knew well, therefore, what would be my father's feelings, but I could not tear my thoughts from my employment, loathsome in itself, but which had taken an irresistible hold of my imagination. I wished, as it were, to procrastinate all that related to my feelings of affection until the great object, which swallowed up every habit of my nature, should be completed. I then thought that my father would be unjust as he ascribed my neglect to vice or faultiness on my part, but I am now convinced that he was justified in conceiving that I should not be altogether free from blame. A human being in perfection ought always to preserve a calm and peaceful mind, and never to allow passion or transitory desire to disturb his tranquility. I do not think that the pursuit of knowledge is an exception to this rule. If the study to which you apply yourself has a tendency to weaken your affections and to destroy your taste for those simple pleasures in which no alloy can possibly mix, then that study is certainly unlawful. That is to say, not befitting the human mind. If this rule were always observed, no man allowed any pursuit whatsoever to interfere with the tranquility of his domestic affections. Greece had not been enslaved. Caesar would not have spared his country. America would have been discovered more gradually, and the empires of Mexico and Peru had not been destroyed. But I forget that I am moralizing in the most interesting part of my tale, and your looks remind me to proceed. My father made no reproach in his letters, and only took notice of my silence by inquiring into my occupations more particularly than before. Winter, spring, and summer passed away during my labors, but I did not watch the blossom or the expanding leaves, sights which before always yielded me supreme delight, so deeply was I engrossed in my occupation. The leaves of that year had withered before my work drew near to a close, and now every day showed me more plainly how well I had succeeded. But my enthusiasm was checked by my anxiety, and I appeared rather like one doomed by slavery to toil in the mines or any other unwholesome trade than an artist occupied by his favorite employment. Every night I was oppressed by a slow fever, and I became nervous to a most painful degree. The fall of a leaf startled me, and I shunned my fellow creatures as if I had been guilty of a crime. Sometimes I grew alarmed at the wreck I had perceived that I had become. The energy of my purpose alone sustained me. My labors would soon end, and I believed that exercise and amusement would then drive away incipient disease, and I promised myself both of these when my creation should be complete. You will probably read one more chapter, I think. Chapter 5. It was on a dreary night of November that I beheld the accomplishment of my toils. With an anxiety that almost amounted to agony, I collected the instruments of life around me, that I might infuse a spark of being into the lifeless thing that lay at my feet. It was already 1 in the morning. The rain pattered dismally against the panes, and my candle was nearly burnt out, when, by the glimmer of the half-extinguished light, I saw the dull, yellow eye of the creature open. It breathed hard, and a convulsive motion agitated its limbs. No lightning bolt? That messes up my thumbnail. How can I describe my emotions at this catastrophe, or how delineate the wretch whom with such infinite pains and care I had endeavored to form? His limbs were in proportion, and I had selected his features as beautiful, great God! His yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath. His hair was of a lustrous black and flowing, his teeth of a pearly whiteness. But these luxuriances only formed a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes that seemed almost of the same color as the dune white sockets in which they were set, his shriveled complexion and straight black lips. The different accidents of life are not so changeable as the feelings of human nature. I had worked hard for nearly 2 years for the sole purpose of infusing life into an inanimate body. For this I had deprived myself of rest and health. I had desired it with an ardor that far exceeded moderation, but now that I had finished, the beauty of the dream vanished, and the breathless horror and disgust filled my heart. Unable to endure the aspect of the being I had created, I rushed out of the room and continued a long time traversing my bedchamber, unable to compose my mind to sleep. At length, lassitude seemed to be the tumult I had before endured, and I threw myself on the bed in my clothes, endeavoring to seek a few moments of forgetfulness. But it was in vain. I slept, indeed, but I was disturbed by the wildest dreams. I thought I saw Elizabeth, in the bloom of health, walking in the streets of Ingolstadt. Delighted and surprised, I embraced her, but as I imprinted the first kiss on her lips, they became livid with the hue of death. Her features appeared to change, and I thought that I held the corpse of my dead mother in my arms. A shroud enveloped her form, and I saw the grave worms crawling in the folds of the flannel. I started from my sleep with horror. A cold dew covered my forehead, my teeth chattered, and every limb became convulsed. When, by the dim and yellow light of the moon, as it forced its way through the window shutters, I beheld the wretch, the miserable monster whom I had created. He held up the curtain of the bed, and his eyes, if eyes they may be called, were fixed upon me. His jaws opened, and he muttered some inarticulate sounds, while a grin wrinkled his cheeks. He might have spoken, but I did not hear. One hand was stretched out, seemingly to detain me, but I escaped, and rushed down the stairs. I took refuge in the courtyard belonging to the house which I inhabited, where I remained during the rest of the night, walking up and down in the greatest agitation, listening attentively, catching and fearing each sound, as if it were to announce the approach of the demoniacal corpse to which I had so miserably given life. Yeah, poor little monster. He just, he wanted to communicate, reach out to his creator, say, hey, by the way, could we my left leg is a little twingy, maybe we could work on that. Probably something like that, right? It's like maybe increases dexterity score. Oh, no mortal could support the horror of that countenance. A mummy again endured with animation could not be so hideous as that wretch. I had gazed on him while unfinished. He was ugly then, but when those muscles and joints were rendered capable of motion, it became a thing such as even Dante could not have conceived. I passed the night wretchedly. Sometimes my pulse beat so quickly and hardly that I felt the palpitation of every artery. At others, I sank to the ground through languor and extreme weakness. Mingled with this horror, I felt the bitterness of disappointment. Dreams that had been my food and pleasant rest for so long a space were now become a hell to me, and the change was so rapid, the overthrow so complete. Morning, dismal and wet, at length dawned, and discovered to my sleepless and aching eyes the church of Ingolstadt, its white steeple and clock, which indicated the 6th hour. The porter opened the gates of the court, which had which had that night been my asylum, and I issued into the streets, pacing them with quick steps, as if I sought to avoid the wretch whom I feared every turning of the street would present to my view. I did not dare return to the apartment which I inhabited, but felt impelled to hurry on, although drenched by the rain which poured from a black and comfortless sky. So, he's a deadbeat dad? That's what I'm hearing. I continued walking in this manner for some time, endeavoring by bodily exercise to ease the load that weighed upon my mind. I traversed the streets without any clear conception of where I was. Yeah, you went for milk. You distracted me, Valana, jeez. I traversed the streets without any clear conception of where I was or what I was doing. My heart palpitated in the sickness of fear, and I hurried on with irregular steps, not daring to look about me. Like one who, on a lonely road, doth walk in fear and dread, and having once turned round, walks on, and turns no more his head, because he knows a frightful fiend doth close behind him dread. Coleridge's Ancient Mariner. That's a footnote, apparently. Continuing thus, I came at length opposite to the inn at which the various diligences and carriages usually stopped. Here I paused. I know not why, but I remained some minutes with my eyes fixed on a coach that was coming towards me from the other end of the street. As it drew near, I observed that it was the Swiss diligence. It stopped just where I was standing, and, on the door being opened, I perceived Henry Clerval, who, on seeing me, instantly sprung out. "My dear Frankenstein," he exclaimed, "how glad I am to see you! How fortunate that you should be here at the very moment of my alighting!" Nothing could equal my delight on seeing Clerval. His presence brought back to my thoughts my father, Elizabeth, and all those scenes of home so dear to my recollection. I grasped his hand, and in a moment forgot my horror and misfortune. I felt suddenly, and for the first time during many months, calm and serene joy. I welcomed my friend, therefore, in the most cordial manner, and we walked towards my college. Clerval continued talking for some time about our mutual friends and his own good fortune in being permitted to come to Ingolstadt. "You may easily believe," said he, "how great was the difficulty to persuade my father that all necessary knowledge was not comprised in the noble art of bookkeeping, and indeed I believe I left him incredulous to the last, for his constant answer to my unwearied entreaties was the same as that of the Dutch schoolmaster in the Vicar of Wakefield. I have 10,000 florins a year without Greek. Without Greek. I eat heartily without Greek, but his affection for me at length overcame his dislike of hearing, and he has permitted me to undertake a voyage of discovery to the land of knowledge. It gives me the greatest delight to see you. But tell me how you left my father, brothers, and Elizabeth." "Very well, and very happy, only a little uneasy that they hear from you so seldom. By the by, I mean to lecture you a little upon their account myself. But, my dear Frankenstein," continued he, stopping short and gazing full in my face, "I did not before remark how very ill you appear, so thin and pale. You look as if you had been watching for several nights. You look as if you had been watching for several nights? I mean, I watch things for months, years, my whole life. I'm kind of the opposite of thin and pale. Well, thin. You have guessed right. I have lately been so deeply engaged in one occupation that I have not allowed myself sufficient rest, as you see, but I sincerely hope, that all these employments are now at an end, and that I am at length free. I trembled excessively. I could not endure to think of, and far less to allude to, the occurrences of the preceding night. I walked with a quick pace, and we soon arrived at my college. I then reflected, and the thought made me shiver, that the creature whom I had left in my apartment might still be there, alive, and walking about. I dreaded to behold this monster, but I feared still more that Henry should see him, entreating him, therefore, to remain a few minutes at the bottom of the stairs. I darted up towards my own room. My hand was already on the lock of the door before I recollected myself. I then paused, and a cold shivering came over me. I threw the door forcibly open, as children are accustomed to do when they expect a spectre to stand in waiting for them on the other side, but nothing appeared. I stepped fearfully in. The apartment was empty, and my bedroom was also freed from its hideous guest. I could hardly believe that so great a good fortune could have befallen me, but when I became assured that my enemy had indeed fled, I clapped my hands for joy and ran down to Clerval. And who's the monster again? I think the book has it around the wrong way. We ascended into my room, and the servant presently brought breakfast, but I was unable to contain myself. It was not joy only that possessed me. I felt my flesh tingle with excess of sensitiveness, and my pulse beat rapidly. I was unable to remain for a single instant in the same place. I jumped over the chairs, clapped my hands, and laughed aloud. Clerval at first attributed my unusual spirits to joy on his arrival, but when he observed me more attentively, he saw wildness in my eyes, for which he could not account, and my loud, unrestrained, heartless laughter frightened and astonished him. "My dear Victor," cried he, "what, for God's sake, is the matter? Do not laugh in that manner. How ill are you? What is the cause of all this?" "Do not ask me," I cried. "Do not ask me," cried I, putting my hands before my eyes, for I thought I saw the dreaded spectre glide into the room. He can tell. Oh, save me, save me! I imagined the monster seized me, and I struggled furiously and fell down in a fit. Poor Clerval. What must have been his feelings? A meeting which he anticipated with such joy so strangely turned to bitterness. But I was not the witness of his grief, for I was lifeless, and did not recover my senses for a long, long time. This was the commencement of a nervous fever, which confined me for several months. During all that time, Henry was my only nurse. I afterwards learned that, knowing my father's advanced age and unfitness for so long a journey, and how wretched my sickness would make Elizabeth, he spared them this grief by concealing the extent of my disorder. He knew that I could not have a more kind and attentive nurse than himself, and firm in the hope he felt of my recovery, he did not doubt that, instead of doing harm, he performed the kindest action that he could towards them. But I was in reality very ill, and surely nothing but the unbounded and unremitting attentions of my friend could have restored me to life. Yeah, what a great friend. That's right. He is a great friend. Wonder what happened to Frankenstein's monster in this whole time. The form of the monster on whom I had bestowed existence was forever before my eyes, and I raved incessantly concerning him. Doubtless my words surprised Henry, and at first he believed them to be the wanderings of my disturbed imagination, but the pertinacity with which I continually recurred to the same subject, persuaded him that my disorder indeed owed its origin to some uncommon and terrible event. Yeah, might have to tune in next time, that's right. By very slow degrees and with frequent relapses that alarmed and grieved my friend, I recovered. I remember the first time I became capable of observing outward objects with any kind of pleasure. I perceived that the fallen leaves had disappeared, and that the young buds were shooting forth from the trees that shaded my window. It was a divine spring, and the season contributed greatly to my convalescence. I felt also sentiments of joy and affection revive in my bosom. My gloom disappeared, and in a short time I became as cheerful as before I was attacked by the fatal passion. Dearest Clerval, exclaimed I, how kind, how very good you are to me. This whole winter, instead of being spent in study as you promised yourself, has been consumed in my sick room. How shall I ever repay you? I feel the greatest remorse for the disappointment of which I have been the occasion, but you will forgive me. You will repay me entirely if you do not discompose yourself. But get well as fast as you can, and since you appear in such good spirits, I may speak to you on one subject, may I not? I trembled. One subject. What could it be? Could he allude to an object on whom I dared not even think? Compose yourself, said Clerval, who observed my change of color. I will not mention it if it agitates you, but your father and cousin would be very happy if they received a letter from you in your own handwriting. They hardly know how ill you have been and are uneasy at your long silence. Is that all, my dear Henry? How could you suppose that my first thoughts would not fly towards those dear, dear friends whom I love, and who are so deserving of my love? If this is your present temper, my friend, you will perhaps be glad to see a letter that has been lying here some days for you. It is from your cousin, I believe. That is the end of chapter 5. Well, in nearly every version of Frankenstein I have ever heard of, there was a lightning bolt. As such, I put one in the thumbnail for my streams, and we're going to keep it. It'll be a secret, I guess. Only those who listen to this VOD will know the true nature of the lightning bolt. How's that so far? That's not bad. We're going through it pretty fast. It's like probably the later chapters of 1984, I suppose. But it's okay. It's good. There are a bunch of words. I'm just gonna laugh at them and laugh at my pronunciation. I have no idea. I think sometimes I'm close, maybe even on target. Notice my eyebrows? That's because of my glasses. They're just flipping, going crazy. Yeah, we're just gonna laugh at the mispronunciations and the unfamiliar words and move on. Otherwise, it's enjoyable. It's I guess like many of these stories, they're so old that they're very different from sort of what we're familiar with, and in a sense, kind of become a new story, almost a new version of themselves due to their unfamiliarity, which is kind of an interesting phenomenon, I believe. Yeah. Tomorrow, I do not stream, of course, as usual. That's Tuesday, so on Wednesday we will, 5 p.m. PDT. If you haven't already, and you are so inclined and enjoying these streams, kindly follow if you are so inclined. And if you wish to catch up on my other stories, we do have a growing VOD collection over on YouTube. Please join those. Until next time, Please return your reading materials to the shelves and remember to be kind to one another.